It's an honor for me to welcome our first international speaker, Corey McCarty. Corey is a polyglot developer based in the United States, father of four amazing kids. So, Corey, welcome to this podcast, and thanks a lot for accepting this invitation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So, I guess we can start with a lighter note. Like, I was just wondering, how were you able to attend the meetings and stand-ups and code along with four kids at home? That requires serious time management skills, and like the kids might be disturbing you a lot. So, how did you manage that thing?
Well, at different points, it's different amounts of issue. Right now, normally I have one child that's already in school and three that are normally at a babysitter during the day. So usually it's not an issue during the peak of pandemic and lockdown and everybody being stuck in the house. My wife and mother-in-law usually able to keep the kids wrangled for the majority of the day. They'll just come in, I don't know, once an hour or so, looking for hugs and asking questions and things.
Mhm. So, that wasn't an issue for you then.
Luckily, all of my coworkers have always been really understanding of if a kid pops up and is in my lap, nobody's bothered by it.
I saw videos during lockdown of developers meetings and kids popping on here and there. Even the bosses were fine with it. So I think as a developer society, we have grown to accept these things. The COVID-19, the lockdown taught us those things. So for people tuning in, I would like to give a bit of background information about Corey. He has a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the University of Memphis, and he was also a part of IEEE robotics team. So Corey, I was just going through your GitHub profile, and around it's been, I think, 10 years or more than that, that you worked on a few projects. Do you want to discuss about them? One of which was Ice Free and Android application. I think it's abandoned now.
It is abandoned, oddly enough. So we did that project for my operating systems class, and the charge for the project was to operate a service level application, something that didn't require direct user interface interaction for its primary functionality. Um, we decided to make an application
Mhm.
that would allow you to open certain things on your phone without having to look down. With the understanding being that people are going to continue using their phone while they're driving,
Yeah.
and it would be best if we could allow them to not have to look away from the road. Um, the first initial hurdles were being able to recognize if you're driving or if you're walking, different things like that, and then being able to recognize like a two shake or a three shake, or turning the phone a different way, to be able to recognize going like this is
Mhm.
different than sideways, to where we could specifically figure out what gestures you were executing. Oddly enough, it wasn't an entire year. It might not have been
Mhm.
the end of the semester before Apple released a feature for the iPhone by the same name that achieved many of the same functionalities.
Well, that's hardening. So did your app use some kind of sensors? It was using some API calls to sensors.
In Android, we were registering listeners for shakes, and we did a G-force calculation. You basically track
Mhm.
the changes in the gyro, and measure how large the changes are, how fast. It's a rough approximation to G-force,
Yeah.
and we would recognize patterns within certain distance, like anything that crosses 2 Gs
Mhm.
within 500 milliseconds, we would call two shakes. Um, and then that was being able to launch your music or open maps.
Mhm.
to get you more quickly to things that would be not so hazardous while you're driving, and things that you might be wanting to use. You know, might want to have your music, might want to have your maps, might want to like get to your text message and then be able to, you know, quickly hit a microphone to record something, but be able to get to those things quickly.
The idea seems novel, but I think Apple had different plans. And did you publish it, or it was just execution of idea?
So the fact that Apple, I think, beat us before the end of the semester, or maybe it was the next semester. They took our name, they took our functionality. It just kind of became, we didn't think it was really a good spot in the market for it. Also realized a little bit later on that you could kind of achieve everything that we wanted in Android if you had a rooted Android using the Tasker app. You could set those things up pretty easily, and there was already a market, kind of a sharing platform for Tasker routines, so that didn't really see a good place for taking it to market, but it was definitely exciting to be able to get that put together.
Yeah, semester projects are usually exciting to work on teams, and I think you worked with one of your teammates or friends on it. Well, a bit of advice on how to approach to projects for university students that might be listening to this. Well, surely they will be listening to this. A bit of advice on the software side of things.
So for one thing, if you're using for any project, I highly recommend starting as soon as you can, getting comfortable with Git. Various things happen when we're writing code. We break things, maybe our computer fails. Having your projects, especially now that you can have private repositories without a paid account. You can get your changes out there in GitHub so that you can retrieve them quickly. Even if you're just using Git in your local, being able to revert to a previous state of everything was working before I started working on this, and be able to minimize, you know, how far back you have to go to get something fixed. It also, when you get into working on group projects, being able to successfully use Git to sync data with different people. I know when I was working on the Eyes Free project, I was working in Linux, and then my partner was working in Windows, and we had lots of headaches just around git ignore things and like IDE configurations. And so I know spent a lot of time getting around that, but those are things that you're going to face on any professional team. You need to make sure that you have the relevant bits, all of the relevant bits, and none of the irrelevant bits in your GitHub repository or whatever Git source you use, so that your team can get through things that way. Another thing that I really like to highlight is once you get to the point where you can bring a little bit larger of an application together and get the code working, when you have multiple classes or multiple files that are interacting with one another, clean code starts becoming something that you can start learning. Obviously, I can't remember who said it, but I think Uncle Bob said that nobody writes clean code. Nobody. We write hideous code that works. And after you have the working code, it takes an effort to clean it up. Things like you don't do memory management in the middle of your higher abstraction data management. You need to go through, you want your memory management and your lower level things, hopefully tucked away in classes that handle just those things. And your code flow in any given place shouldn't be handling several abstraction layers. It should allow you to read through it as if you're reading a book. You want to be able to look at, I've heard it recommended that a function should only have 6 lines. Sometimes that's a little short, but being able to make it short and make your variable names meaningful, be able to have functions that do more complex things if it's going to happen in many places. Really remembering that your code's going to be read many more times than it will be written, and remembering that the things that you might think just need to be done for somebody else to understand your code are needed for you to remember how to use it in 6 months.
Right.
Because especially, I know like semester projects are some of the worst. You wrote it 2 semesters ago and you go back and you go, okay, how did I do this?
Yeah.
It might as well be a foreign language at this point if you didn't take the time to clean it up and write comments. And, you know, I absolutely love documentation in the repository. README files are a wonderful thing. Explain, how do I install this? How do I run it? What parts are necessary? What do the different entry points do? Are really, really helpful. Taking the time to do these things when we're writing the code can really help us come in and out of it as we need to.
Yeah, sure. So in the last 5 minutes, Corey just give you all the golden rules for starting out in the software industry. And yeah, I have like heard these rules from some of the developers before, but not like the way you explained. And for the folks who do not know about Git, it's a distributed system, sorry, a version control system for your code. Basically, if you do not know about it, you can Google it. The next thing you talked about a function having 9 lines of code, and I think they also said that your function should have only 4 parameters, 4 arguments, not more than that. What is your take on that? You should not have like 9 parameters passing to a function.
So I absolutely love that. Sometimes it becomes rather cumbersome. I really like, personally, I don't write enough of it in my day-to-day life, but Python, being able to create a dictionary to hold whatever it is that you need for the relevant things, very similar to if you've worked with JavaScript, the JavaScript objects are very close to the dictionaries in Python. But being able to put together something that might be a class in Java, but in a more dynamic way, to where, you know, we might use it in a couple places and maybe it doesn't feel quite right to write a full class for it. But data classes can be used for that as well. I really enjoy Lombok just for this very much. You can throw in Java, you can use annotations for getter, setter, all args constructor, no args constructor, and then you just put the fields in the class and you don't have to write any functions. And it lets you get something like that put together. So if you have 15 arguments that need to be passed in, well, does it all relate to the same thing? Is it all representative of a person? Maybe you make a person data class and you put all that data in the person and you pass that as your argument. And it makes things a little more clear that we're passing in person data, all of the data that goes with the person. Right now, the task that I have on my desk for work today involves handling person data. And I'm looking at functions where we have 9 to 15 arguments coming in. And that is a tremendous headache when you start looking at, okay, well, we're doing this in a few different places. I need to change the function itself to include a couple more parameters. I need to go out to everywhere that's used and add those parameters. And
it's a tedious task.
Look at, you know, I'm looking at a file that's like 2 screenfuls wide for all the arguments for the function. And I've got to break it into multi-lines just so I can look at it and conceptualize it. I think one of the important things I've heard said about clean code is considerate, or it's polite. It doesn't ask too much of you. When you're reading through it, it lets you see what's going on without having to stop and spend 5 minutes trying to figure out what's happening on a single line of code. It's really easy for us to grab these complex, these, you know, really, some might call them brilliant, these seem like super smart tricks to make something happen, or nest these ternaries so we're not writing 8 lines of code. But if it takes you more than 30 seconds to understand a line of code, you're probably doing too much. A line of code should hold a single thought, which simple ternaries can be great, where it lets you save, instead of 5 lines of code, you have 1 line of code, as long as you can wrap your head around it at one time.
Those small lines of code do more harm than good. It might take developer like 5 minutes instead of 2 minutes to understand the code. So you talked about the code quality. Have you read the book Clean Code by, I do not remember the author name. Have you read it?
Robert Martin he was the original author, and I mentioned Uncle Bob. I wrote a couple blog posts. I'm not sure if you'll have my blog linked down below here. It's Corey D McCarty.dev.
Yeah.
I have a couple blog posts. One, who is Uncle Bob, and 2, I went through his first session and kind of broke it down in text, explaining that. And I really enjoy the things that he started. I know some people have kind of some political issues with him as a person. I think it's a great thing, especially in this industry. We have so many brilliant minds that they are people that have their own outside views of things that might be terrible, but in this recognize that they do some really brilliant things, and they brought us some really good ideas, and we kind of have to be able to compartmentalize those things. I really enjoy clean code in my everyday work. I currently work in a company that only has 34 employees, and one of the things that I absolutely love is that me and my other 2 developers that make up the entire dev team, we're working to make our code easier to read and easier to use. Something like Java has in recent years added multi-line strings, where you can use 3 double quotes, and you can write multi-line strings that are even formatted with white space, where before we needed to create a string builder and every line be string builder append this little piece of a line, so that you wind up with, maybe you have this long query that's being put together, and every line of the query has a sb.append on it, and if you need to pull that query out, you got to pull it out, and then you got to go to a text editor, and you got to string replace a bunch of stuff to where you can get the query out and start working with it. So trying to reduce the overhead and clean your code up has really a lot of benefits in, when you start getting into more complex things and having to bounce between your front end code, your back end code, working with your data store directly. Just tremendous benefits are to be had by just keeping your code cleaner overall.
You just mentioned about the new features that Java has added. So upon that question, I read in one of your blogs, the Hacktoberfest blog, and you mentioned that Java programming language is a closed source language or a proprietary language. So what makes you say that? I think a language cannot be closed source. I think a language compiler can be closed source. So what made you write that Java is a proprietary kind of thing? Is it because of
the writings of the language itself, the definitions of the language is not an
I think you're breaking, Corey.
open committee. The compiler, I'm sorry, I think I broke up just a little bit there.
Yeah.
The committee that runs the language and the decisions that are made for it, and the specification of the primary compiler are not open to external contributors. If you look at something like Golang or Python, you have central contributors that do things kind of the way that they want to within reason, but you also have open distribution lists and GitHub repos where you can go and join in the conversation of how things are working. You can request the features directly there. And if you had the time to do so, you could jump in and implement those features and open a pull request to them. This is something that you really don't have with Java as its primary release. There is OpenJDK, which is an open compiler, but it is going to trail the primary Java release, as it's really only licensed for the Java ownership to say, hey, I don't want to work on this after a certain point. We're going to let OpenJDK handle the long-term issues.
So like, is that the reason why a few developers, like there's a saying in the developer community, which I'm a part of, that Java is slowly being replaced by its competitors like Go and Rust. People are finding more easy to start new projects or new modules with Go other than Java. Well, surely Java is still the enterprise king, and I think it's not going anywhere in the next 5 to 10 years. The Kafka is written on it. So is that a reason, like a Java, the centralized version of Java is hampering its growth and giving opportunities to Go and Rust?
I think they've really done a lot of great things in the last few years. Honestly, I spent most of my career working in companies that are using old versions of Java. So we didn't even have the newer features, but after Java 8 and 9, you really saw a lot more functional programming, a lot of the things that we're looking for in quote unquote more modern languages. They've also gone to a regular release cadence more recently. So you'll see features coming out more regularly, where before we may have had years between releases. So I think Java is really doing a great job of modernizing. You could say the same thing about PHP. There were some bad things that people didn't like in PHP early on, and there were some bad things that people didn't like in Java early on. And I think both of those languages have really come a long way in recent years to modernize. And these are two of the languages that vast majority of the internet and the computer systems out there are using. I think Python and Golang and JavaScript, they all have their places, and they will definitely have people that enjoy using them more. But there's still a lot of COBOL code out there right now, and most of the old COBOL developers are either retiring or becoming Scrum Masters because their systems are starting to get played out, and with the large amounts of COBOL code that are still out there running, there's still people that need new developers to manage these systems in different places. So, I mean, you can say what you want about Java being old and COBOL being old and PHP being old. They've been around long enough that large portions of the code out there running are using them. And there's a lot to be said about learning the things that the majority of the world is running on.
You mentioned about COBOL. I had a news, I think 2 months back, that US government offices are like hiring for COBOL developers, but they are not getting one. Yeah, that news did come to us also.
And as much as people think that PHP and Java are a headache, COBOL, the language and the editor are basically the same basis they were 30 years ago. You have to write it within its specific editor, and it's not user friendly. There's a lot of people that don't really want to do it, and they're having a really hard time. My understanding is, as an entry-level COBOL developer, you can make pretty substantial amounts of money just because they can't find anybody right now.
The worst thing is COBOL is not the hot thing in the market, so new developers are not kind of into learning these languages. They consider it obsolete. I think we connected because I wrote an article on Medium, and was that our connection became?
I really don't keep track well enough about when or where connections were really made. I just try to engage people to Twitter can be really hard for people that are getting into tech if they're not going directly into web dev. Backend systems are a large portion of the jobs out there. Java, PHP, COBOL, these languages that aren't as attractive, these are still large portions of the jobs that are out there. And I really try to talk to people about the fact that there's more than JavaScript, there's more than Python, there's more than Golang, there's more than whatever the new tool is. I know that when Dino came out, what was it, a couple of years ago, everybody was talking about, oh, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to software. But like a few people started using it and then it just kind of disappeared. Like new JavaScript frameworks and tools are going to be the biggest buzz in tech Twitter. But most of the time they're either going to be a thing that everybody strapped onto and it just worked and they don't talk about it much anymore, or they're going to figure out that it wasn't great and it's just going to go away. But we have these languages that we know are working well. People talk about Python as a newer language, but it's been around for more than 20 years.
Older than Java, I guess. 1984, if I may.
I can't remember which one came first, but it's not much newer than Java if it is newer than Java. I think I read that Lisp and Python came out around the same time. And no, it wasn't Lisp, it was Perl. Perl and Python came out at about the same time. And everybody either used one or the other. And now we think about Perl as being ancient, and we still think that Python is new, but it's just because there's more people using Python than Perl in general. Languages can be great for a long time.
Yeah.
All that's really necessary is that they're kept up to date, they're maintained, they don't become extremely vulnerable, and keep those vulnerabilities. I mean, we've seen in the last, 6 months ago, the log4j issues. Yeah, most Java code out there right now is Spring Boot, or at least on Spring Framework. And early on, log4j was the only thing that was quickly available. And the number of developers that worked over that weekend out there just to fix that in large companies is huge. But there was a fix put out. There was work to be able to improve it, and long-term log4j got patched up, Spring Boot got patched up to not include that. And they made some decisions to compensate for prior versions that maybe they shouldn't have. And these things happen. You will in your career have somebody say, we need to maintain compatibility with previous versions, even though it's a bad idea. And I guess one thing that I would say, advice for people going forward, you need to understand that bad ideas happen. Sometimes bad ideas have to be embraced, and you just have to work on minimizing the bad that can come from them and understanding what the potential problems are and how you would have to go about fixing them when you're putting the things out into the world. Some business person is going to say, oh, we don't have time to fix that, or we have to continue doing this because whatever team over in the next building can't be held responsible for upgrading their system to your new changes, and it would cost the company too much money to fix it. You may have the time to fix your system, but all of the systems calling your system, some of them are overburdened. Some of them might not have development anymore if you're in some places. So understanding the larger scope of things, being able to bring in, hey, this is a bad idea. Go to your boss. This is a bad idea, and this is why it's a bad idea. And they say, okay, well, we're still going to have to do it. Being able to communicate, if we do this, then we're going to face X problem. And we're going to, if and when that arises, we're going to have to do Y solution. And it's going to cost us Z amount of time to fix. And really help the people that are making the decisions to understand those issues. Because it's not about having a perfect system. It's about having a system that works, and being able to stay ahead of those problems can be a really big step in order to keep things working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have few pointers to add to that. You mentioned about log4j vulnerability, and Java as a language and open source code contributing got a hit. Like you cannot just depend on open source if these kind of massive vulnerabilities are into the developers who are writing the code. So a kind of negative thing happened for open source things. And about the Dino you mentioned, so the people who do not know what Dino is, it's the same creator, Ryan, who developed Node, also developed Dino as a replacement for Node, because he thought the packages held, dependency held is annoying for developers. So he kind of just started working on a new project. And I still do not know what's the trajectory of Dino, but I'm sure it will be good in the future, for the future. One thing, what was your first programming language? You can then continue.
So I would say I had kind of 3 entries into computer programming. One entry point, I had a TI-84 calculator in the 8th grade in, I want to say it was either I think it was pre-algebra in 8th grade. My friend and I already understood what was going on in the class, and we kind of sat over to the corner and we started writing little menu-based programs for, you could say, like if you had a 3-variable formula, you could enter your value for 1, your value for 2, and then X for the 3rd, and it would just solve for that other one. And you could do that for any of them. I want to solve for A or B or C, and I have the other 2. Then you could enter that in, and it would solve for it. And we like built a menu to where do like the quadratic equation or whatever the different equations were, and be able to do that. The teacher didn't seem to have a problem because we wrote the code ourselves directly in the calculator. We weren't going home and writing it on the computer and loading it into the calculator. I don't even think I had a wire to do that. We were just writing on a calculator, TI basic code, I'd come to find out later, so that we could basically cheat on our math. But the teacher was okay with it because we were writing the code and it was something that we did ourselves and we had to understand it well enough. The next point would have been about the same time. Maybe it was just before. There was a website called AngelFire many, many years ago. It was free web hosting.
Yeah.
And the most basic, there was an easy HTML editor to where you could put things together. You could add your background images and make lists and make blocks of text and things. And then somewhere along the way, I think I was probably 8 or 9, so it had to have been before that. Maybe it was a little later, but I got bored with the easy HTML editor, and I just went to the raw HTML and started working on stuff. This was around the time that DHTML started, so we're talking about still firmly in Web 1.0, right?
Yeah.
Dynamic HTML was about the same time I think XML came out. And so I would go in those days, you'd go in your web browser and just say view source, and everything that wasn't JavaScript, you just had right there because so much of the things were just raw HTML out there. I remember thinking to myself at that point, I hated JavaScript because I couldn't look at it and figure out what part was doing what. But I would just go rip chunks of HTML out of any website I could find that had something interesting, and I'd shove it in a page. And I had, I think, a couple pages together, but it was mostly what I was doing with it. You could generally recognized if you ever saw MySpace. It was just a page of, links to bands that I liked and music that I was listening to and whatever articles I'd read or whatever it was. It was just like a message board that I just put a bunch of stuff in. It could have been a newsletter or something, but I put it up on Angel Fire and I was writing and editing all the HTML for it. So that was kind of my second entry point. My third entry point was when I finally decided I was going to do something with my life after waiting tables and kind of doing not much for a long time. I decided I was going to go back to school. I'd been really good with grammar and syntax in primary schools, and I had written a lot of poetry and things, and I knew that poets don't make any money. There may be 1 million poets in the world, and maybe 12 of them are making a living wage. And so my dad worked in computers. He has done third-party IT work for my entire life, pretty much, working on printers and network stuff and website stuff and servers and desktops and anything and everything. And I decided I was going to go write code. And at the time, I didn't even connect it back to the HTML stuff that I'd done or the calculator programming I had done. It was just, I'm going to go do this. And I jumped into computer science at University of Memphis. I was in computer science for several semesters. I think I was actually up to junior level computer science. I took a course called computer organization, and we got into doing things like state diagrams and transitioning and stuff like that. And I remember the instructor was very boring. He would stand and read in the most monotone voice ever. He would read directly from the book, and nobody wanted to listen to him, and it was terrible. But he looked up at one point when we were doing state diagrams, and he said, and if any of you has any interest in this, you need to walk across over there and go to engineering. So at the end of the semester, I did that. I went over to engineering because the state diagram stuff really interested me, and how you could track, binary decisions on this graph and figure out how you would transition from one state to another and do different things. And that really interested me. So I went over to engineering and I did computer engineering. For a short time, I thought I was going to do a double major in computer engineering and electrical engineering until I hit one particularly nasty semester and realized I didn't really care about the electrical part anymore. And it was not so much an interest of mine, and I just let go of that. I later found out from a counselor that, oh yeah, we've been working on trying to fix the course catalog to keep people from taking that exact semester right there ever, because it would destroy you. It was electronics one, microprocessors, signals and systems, and I think I was taking differential equations that semester. It felt like they should all go together the way that the course catalog was laid out. But I think maybe there's logical system design in there too. But like, I had a full 13-hour course load, and every single day, Monday through Friday, I had a 1-hour lab that was like 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. with, work that had to be done before you came in lab and work that had to be done after lab. So it was, honestly, I was starting my days at 8 a.m. and my class day wasn't over until 5 p.m. And then I had 3 hours of homework every night when I went home, and I crashed hard. I failed more things than I passed that semester. And I realized that electrical engineering wasn't for me.
Yeah, sure.
But
yeah.
I was going to say, through computer engineering, I learned everything from circuits, logic design, how microprocessors work, writing both assembly and hex and binary version of machine code, coming up through the stack into C and Java and Python and operating systems, and really got an understanding of the entire stack all the way down to the metal. And it was something that I really enjoyed. But there are points in work that you will find that math heavy knowledge will help you, or that engineering heavy knowledge will help you. And then there's the vast majority of the other times when a computer science major or a business information system major could all do the same work and get the same thing done. These deeper understandings come up sometimes, not always. You can make a career without it.
I just need, I think college should be like more of a networking thing, making friends, getting teams to work on cool projects than the course curriculum that is being taught to us, because it might not help in the real world. Like electrical engineers are getting jobs in Microsoft and they're doing pure coding for next 5 years, and their core knowledge is almost going to waste. So I think the college should become a bit flexible to allow people to choose courses which they like. I think it's flexible now nowadays in US, or it's still the same.
Sometimes it depends on the school and it depends on the program, but there's an entirely separate conversation there about what
Yeah.
our modern school system looks like when we've gotten it down to it's passing a bunch of tests. And when colleges were created, it was more philosophical. It was, we're going to get together and we're going to learn how to learn, and we're going to learn whatever it is that you want to learn. And at the end of your tenure at the school, you will be able to learn and go do something. And I think there is definitely lots and lots of value in going and doing projects. I have a buddy in the code connector community. I have a friend that he did a boot camp and he transitioned without college, and he wrote 100 projects, mostly web dev centric stuff with front ends, building little games, building little task lists and calendars and whatever. He built 100 projects in a year, and he learned more in doing that than he did in his boot camp. And he was able to have a portfolio site of these things that he could show people, and he could tell you what he learned on what project. And I remember building things in college where it was, you're going to build a queue, and you're going to make the queue function as 3 independent lines with 3 cashiers, or 1 line with 3 cashiers, or 1 line with 1 cashier, and you're going to figure out what works best, and you're going to have these different. That wasn't really interesting. Like you can learn more in something you enjoy than you can doing a task because somebody told you to.
Surely.
That being said, a large portion of working in programming is going to be people handing you tasks that you have to do.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. Like, if we talk about the system of education, then it's definitely not a 1 hour podcast thing. We can like discuss about so many things. We can also compare the education system to India or other countries. So let's not go to that side. Let's focus on the software side of things. So earlier you mentioned about Web 1.0, and it was kind of an era where websites were popping up. The dot-com bubble happened, and now presently we can say we are in Web 3.0 of the blockchain and the cryptocurrency things. The Web 2 was the thing of Facebook and Twitter, and I think they're kind of now integrating blockchains or Ethereum payments into their system. So I've just wanted to know, what is your take on Web 3? Is it the future, or it's just a hoax and it's kind of bubble?
I believe that there are real problems that people are trying to solve with blockchain. Things like data permanence. There are issues in political upheaval where communication channels are being taken down, where data is disappearing, where I believe blockchain communication could be huge because of the distribution. I believe that when there's a dictator that is trying to squash everyone that believes a certain way, and he has the ability to take down servers in his country, and he has the ability to make people disappear that disagree with him, I believe that there's value for the communication in these places to be as open and as permanent as possible so that other people can come across it, and so that when these dictators are found guilty, we can have evidence to try them on the global stage and that we can hold them accountable. I also believe that Bitcoin is an irresponsible use of electricity. When the vast majority of our electricity in this world is being created from coal or oil, I believe that burning clock cycles to transfer money from your pocket to mine, these hashes are getting exponentially more complex. We've gone from the point where early Bitcoin mining, you could take, I remember people talking about you could take a router, just a Wi-Fi router, and you could mine Bitcoin with it. And like those early hashes were super easy. Now we've gone through the point where you need a full desktop, and then you need GPUs, and then we get to the, when the Bitcoin bubble was really starting to come up, you had people that were farming entire dedicated rigs of specialized hardware with, 10 to 100 graphics cards to try to complete these hashes. And then you have an evolution of communities that are trying to share the calculations between them for pieces of completion so that the community can complete the hash before other communities. And then you have farms in China that, they're building factories to mine Bitcoin, and they're really just burning electricity for a large amount of what we're doing with it is trivial tasks. I believe that there's value in Web 3.0, but I think the majority of the things that we're doing with Web 3.0 shouldn't be done with it.
I think some of the miners in the US decided to go all green, use of green energy to mine Bitcoins, because there was a latest crackdown in China by the Chinese regime on these mining rigs. They kind of banned, I think, the blockchain mining itself. Other than that, what in just two sentences, what do you think about Elon Musk just playing with the price of Dogecoin? If you have an opinion on that.
I'd say that honestly, it's nothing new. You're talking about somebody with a lot of money and a lot of influence telling people that he's interested in a thing and doing exactly all that he legally can to influence its price. And people have been doing that in the stock market and the commodities markets for ages. It is what it is, and it's above my pay grade.
Sure, we won't go that much into the blockchain world. It's still new. NFTs are coming up, DAOs are coming up, and I hope it has a good future ahead. And people saying it's a future thing, kind of just take a step aside and think that can it really be the next big thing? Because I think Google is also developing some things on this blockchain or the crypto thing. I'm not sure of that. Okay, so we won't discuss that here. It's a lot of different topic. Coming to your article, I read the top 3 that you mentioned. One was about Hacktober, which we discussed. One was about pitching ideas to developer, in which you mentioned some people come, like the app people, and they say, I have this great idea of app and I want you guys to develop it for me, because they do not have coding knowledge or skills. So are you being approached, or have you been approached in the past by these kind of app guys?
I've had a few of them come up. Usually not to me directly,
Mm.
but I've been in several Discord servers and Slack servers where people come in and they're, or even on Reddit, it's like, hey, I've got this great idea for an app. I really just need a developer to help me make it happen. And what they really mean is, I had an idea and I want
Mm.
somebody else to go do all the work, and then I want to take a majority of the profits. And that's not valid. If you look at things from what you would do in a real world
Mm.
company, you would have designers that would put together a design. You would have, maybe some wireframe people putting together what they would want the thing to do. You would have project planning for what's our market, what's our primary use cases, why would people want to pay money for this, what value can
Mm.
we bring to them, and what does the market look like surrounding this thing. All of that work can be done without a developer. Basically, if you have an app idea and you want to
Mhm.
see a developer take it seriously, you should treat it like a business. You should do your prep work. You should get things in order, and you should bring a developer a plan for, I need a mobile application that is able to do this, 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 and this. And I'm willing to pay you market rate for doing this. Because shares in a company that's doing nothing,
So
any
worthless.
developer that has bills to pay, they're
Mm.
not going to take it.
Mm. That speaks. I think. Do you have a startup idea on your own, or are you working for something on these lines? An app of your imagination that is the next big thing, kind of.
You know what? When I got out of college, I had lots of app ideas and lots of things, but I didn't know how to make them. Now I feel more comfortable about how I would make them, but I've transitioned into making people.
Mm.
I have 4 kids and they take the majority of my time. And I tell you, at the end of the day, if I just get a full night's sleep, I call it
Mm.
a good day. Um,
Absolutely.
have having the extra brain cycles to come up with new ideas for apps has just kind of fallen away. I've been trying to be more conscious of how to
Mhm.
be a contributor to the tech community as a whole, how to help uplift people to understand how to get into tech. Um, People like Danny Thompson are doing more than I could ever dream of. People that are trying to help get people into tech without having to go through college. Just
Yeah.
go learn, go do the work, and get into a job. I try to be more in the space of helping people that have tech jobs understand what's really necessary to go from an entry level position to
Mhm.
a mid level position and eventually to a senior level position, which really comes down to understanding people, soft skills, understanding business requirements, being able to bring more value than just, hey, go do this task.
Yeah. Open source enthusiasts and maintainers, contributors like you, and I think you mentioned Ken Thompson, if I remember the name.
Danny Thompson.
Danny Thompson, right? Sorry for the name. So I am kind of an open source enthusiast. I'm working on a project. I think it's backed up by CNCF. So it's OPA, if you know, open source policy. It's kind of language that is used to implement rules for orchestration software. So it's very niche technology. So I was kind of interested in learning that. My mentor told that consider this. It's like it does have a great future. Okay, so I'm sorry that I did not mention Corey is a lead developer at Summit Professional Education. So can you tell us a bit, treat this as one of the last questions for this podcast. What is Summit Professional Education? Is it,
Um, so we are before the pandemic, we
yeah.
did in-person training for physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech language pathologists. We have instructors that go around the US and help people in those fields garner their continuing education credits to keep their licensure. During the pandemic, we've evolved to doing online courses in video and text and
Mhm.
live webinars and on demand, and still maintaining some live courses coming around again since the pandemic is starting to wind down a little bit.
Sure, I hope the pandemic, it was not a good thing to happen, but it kind of changed the scenario of how people perceive software. It just accelerated the software industry, I think 10 years into the future. That should,
Definitely.
yeah. So I think we are about time to end this podcast. Any last question you have for me, or anything you want to say to the audience tuning in that will listen to you?
Well, the main things I'd like to tell everybody is that you just always got to keep a spirit of learning and trying to build things. Even if you're not building large applications
Yeah.
on the side of your work, being able to build little small scripts to do things to improve your quality of life, be able to talk with your team about things that can make your life easier, make their life easier. Be able to talk to your business people when you get into the field about things that could improve the business overall, the
Mhm.
data flows that have to happen in ways that you can automate things, make things easier, and overall, at the end of the day, deliver more money to the company so that you can show that at the end of your yearly review. Say, I provided this value, I brought this money to the business,
Yeah.
and you know, I'm improving, and I believe I'm worth financial compensation for that. Well, we've all got a life that needs
Mhm.
paying for, and but at the same time, we need to be taking care of our employers and making sure that our team is taken care of as well.
Well, yeah, learning should be the first priority, the first motivation, and finances should be the second one. And yeah, thank you so much, Corey. It was great talking to you. Like, I learned so much in the last 1 hour that I'm gonna remember this talk for at least a long time before we bring in any new guest to this show. Uh, do you have anything to say to me? Like, how was your overall experience talking to me? Or I don't think you do much podcast thing. I was hoping you will be like wearing a headset and your traditional look that is on your Twitter profile, but I was kind of surprised to see you like this.
So this is actually the first time I've ever been on a podcast. I have my big cans that I
Hmm.
normally wear, but I thought
Yeah,
since I was going to be on video, I'd grab my bone conduction, so maybe you could see a little more of me.
sure, sure. That was It's nice. I also looked upon your Stack Overflow profile and you had this huge beard thing. And I was hoping, yeah, let's see that beard, Corey. But it's fine. I'll surely like we'll connect more and I'll try to learn from you. I'll read your rest of the articles that you mentioned, other than those three that are on the top for sure. And yeah,
Well,
that's
let me know if you have any specific topics you'd like to talk about it again in the future. I'll be glad to come back and work through with you.
of course, of course. This I guarantee you, this is not the first time I'm inviting Corey to this show. Surely, I'll reach out to you. We will have an exciting topic to talk upon if you got the time and if you think this show deserves your presence.
I definitely enjoyed it and looking forward to doing it again in the future.
Yeah, sure, Corey. Thank you so much again coming here. Thank you. And to the audience, this was Corey. I hope you had a great time listening to him. Um, yeah, thanks for being here. And yeah,
Thank you. Bye.
one last thing.
Sure.
Okay, I had this question in mind, and I do not want to wrap it around. Do you use VS Code or you are an Emacs guy? Emacs.
No. If we're going to talk about Emacs
Okay.
in the terminal, I'm definitely going to be a Vim guy over
Yeah.
Emacs. VS Code is great text editor. Most of the things I'm doing, I really need the power of an IDE. I need to be
Mhm.
able to search through the entirety of my code, the control click to go look at the code that's being executed from where I call it to where it's written. I love IntelliJ product. I mean, well, sorry, JetBrains product.
Yeah.
the IntelliJ, the PyCharm, the right now I'm using WebStorm and DataGrip, and the if you really want to enable yourself to do more, I keep saying IntelliJ. The JetBrains full all license pack is a wonderful investment, although it does cost, I think, around $300 for the whole thing right now, but it's really powerful.
Yeah, well, I think the people tuning into this podcast might not be the audience you expect them to be, but sure, this is a great advice. I have used IntelliJ products myself. They
Hey,
are
you can get PyCharm and
Mhm.
IntelliJ. Both have community editions that are free
Yeah,
that you can use. You can do most anything that can be done with any JetBrains product. Can It's either Python and PyCharm, or you can make IntelliJ do it.
right. They have great support for auto code completion also.
Yes.
Cool. That was a plug question before we wrap up. So this marks the end of the show. Stay tuned for more amazing guests that I'll be bringing to the show. Till then, stay safe, and you are watching the Priyansh Khodiyar podcast. Thanks, Corey. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.